Welcome to Sanity, a podcast by the New York Sun. My name is A.R. Hoffman, and every week, along with my co-host Rebecca Sugar, we bring a little bit of sanity to your week, and we make sense out of the nonsense.
So the quote of the week, Ari, is from Kennedy Center honoree this year, Gene Simmons, one of the co-lead singers of the band Kiss, for those who remember it. And he
Were you a Kiss fan back in the day?
I can't say that I was, but I really am a Gene Simmons fan. He's a funny guy. He said, quote, "I'm fascinated with myself and love hearing the sound of my own voice. A lot of people don't like being alone because they truly don't like themselves, but I love me." And it just made me laugh because President Trump gave that press conference and announced the winners, and this could have been a quote from President Trump. So I guess that might be one of the reasons why he's on.
I love me. I love that.
More importantly, I just want to say about the Kennedy Center honors. I don't know if you saw the announcement and all the people he's honoring, and it just felt like a huge shift, didn't it, from MAGA and maybe even larger sense the Republicans sort of who have been dominating a certain part of the culture, right? The UFC world of culture. But now they've dipped their toes into the Kennedy Center and the Kennedy Center honors, sort of elite culture. It's a real vibe shift, and I think it's an interesting one to watch. And I don't know about you, but I'm definitely going to be watching this year.
Yeah, and the news is that the president is going to host the event. I mean, I think people sometimes forget that, President Trump is both a sort of participant in and product of popular culture. Right. I mean, this is someone who really spent years on TV, years mixing in the worlds of entertainment, celebrity, and I think he really likes this stuff. And
he loves it. He loves the ratings. He loves it all, and he's funny. He's going to be really funny.
Yeah, the Les Mis. He'll be the star at the Melania Trump Kennedy Center stage.
He even said next year maybe I'll honor myself.
I love me. Great. Okay, so our top story this week we'll have a couple top stories. One of them is what's happening on President Trump's doorstep in the District of Columbia. We'll break down everything you need to know about that quite dramatic set of developments in the nation's capital. And we'll preview a little bit, although by the time you hear this, who knows, the world could have already changed. The powwow between President Putin and Trump in Anchorage, Alaska. I mean,
because you can see Russia from Alaska.
I was just going to say, it wasn't that long ago that Sarah Palin was looking out her window and seeing Moscow. Our Make It Make Sense. We'll talk about one of the stories that if you read The Sun, you might have seen me write once or four times this week, and that is the sort of growing criminal case against Letitia James and Adam Schiff. I really think this is going to be one to watch, and we'll tell you everything you need to know about that, and we'll have our sunlights and sunburns for you. Okay, so Rebecca, the latest news out of D.C. is that President Trump has federalized the D.C. police force, as well as sent in a contingent of National Guard to sort of impose law and order or keep the peace, whatever phrase you want to say. I think there are a couple things worth saying about D.C. and one of them, as someone who lived in D.C., D.C. is very much a city of neighborhoods. Some areas are safe, some very much not safe. Unfortunately, like a lot of other urban areas, the areas that aren't safe are largely minority areas. So, when you say, well, who feels the impact of high crime? Unfortunately, it's those communities most of all. But everyone does. I think overall, the numbers are DC crime has fallen, but is still remarkably high. I think especially as New Yorkers, we would be shocked by the numbers in terms of violent crime and murders in DC. Even if we
5 or 6 times
New York. 5 or 6 times New York,
right.
As well as other urban centers. So crime is a problem. And people who tell you it's not are lying. This is something that, because of DC's weird status, where the federal government sort of is in charge of policing, this is something Trump could do. Now he's talking about extending it. What do you think? What was your immediate reaction?
Yeah, well, I mean, same reaction about the actual just amount of crime.
Yeah.
True as well that President Trump has the authority to do this. The sort of hysteria about fascism and takeovers of American cities and stuff is not real. He has the actual right to do this, and he'll take it to Congress in 30 days and try to extend it. I think Democrats would be insane in Congress to not vote along with him for the extension if it's needed. They won't vote with him, but they should. This is yelling at 91% of the population of D.C. that feels the crime is out of control, that it isn't, is insane.
Yeah. And in a city that votes 90% Democrat.
Right. It's madness. My first thought when this happened was, I just thought back to that Clint Eastwood moment that didn't go over very well in one of the Trump campaign events in, was it 2016 or 2020? I don't remember.
With the chair
With
on
the chair.
Stage. Yeah.
And he was sort of lecturing the sort of quiet American voter that you don't have to live this way. You can vote for who you want to vote for. You can do what's good for you. And it felt like the same idea. We don't have to live this way in American urban centers. We don't have to lock up our deodorant behind plexiglass, and we don't have to worry about getting carjacked or punched in the face on the street. And sometimes you just need a reminder that we don't have to live this way. That's what I thought this move into D.C. really was. It's good for everyone to remember that there's a way to live in a civilized world.
Yeah.
I just want to say something about the Subway sandwich scandal.
Yeah.
Because I think this is actually an important story, albeit a funny one, right? The guy threw a Subway sandwich at close range.
We don't know which one it was, whether it was a Veggie Delight, spicy Italian.
I wonder if that makes a difference in terms of the
density,
weight. Yeah. But he threw it at close range at a CBP agent. There was a line of them standing there in their full gear, and there's this guy in shorts taking a Subway sandwich and throwing it at an agent. And he's been arrested, and Jeanine Pirro went on television and said, you can shove that Subway sandwich wherever she said he could shove it. But the important point is, there's a lot of reaction to this being overreach, arresting this man and charges that might be brought against him. Honestly, this strikes me like the broken windows theory of policing.
I was just going to raise that.
You should not be throwing things at agents, Subway sandwiches or bricks into ICE agents' cars or anything. It's dangerous, it's wrong, and people are not afraid of the authorities anymore. And so he should be made an example of. I don't want him to sit in a jail cell for 2 years. I think he could spend the night there. And then I think he should be spending 6 months washing the dishes of the local agents after their lunch hours. I think that would be an appropriate punishment. We have to stop letting people do these small things because they always lead to bigger things.
Yeah. I just wish I totally agree with you about sort of Democrats, consistently losing 80-20 issues, issues that are popular with Americans solely because of opposition to Trump. Like, I think it should be, I was watching a lot of kind of cable news the last few days about this, because as you said, this isn't really a legal question. This is a sort of political and perception and all that issue. And Democrats often said, well, wait a second, all of a sudden Trump cares about law and order in D.C. Well, didn't he pardon 1,500 people at the Capitol? And I think it should be possible to say, like, yeah, that was a really bad example of lawlessness, but so is the crime, right? And I just wish our political class could acknowledge just different things, and that just because one thing is X doesn't mean another thing can't be Y, and you can't say that, yeah, that was probably gross malpractice, I think, but at the same time, that, as we said, urban violence just, is awful. And it's, I was just at an event with Eric Adams this morning, and say what you want, he was saying that, the only way a city can be prosperous is if it's secure. And I think that's right. I was looking at the list of, young people killed in D.C. In recent, and it's again almost all minority. That doesn't make. I'm not saying that makes it better. I'm just saying that these are tragedies, right? And if you want to uplift communities, you can't do it if people are being ravaged by violence.
Not just a tragedy if someone gets killed, by the way. I mean, the left tends to minimize all other forms of crime, and those are tragedies too in their own way. They really harm people, their livelihoods. They get PTSD from being attacked, all sorts of things. But I just wanted to push back a little bit on what you just said about January 6th. We don't really agree on this topic generally, but President Trump pardoned J6ers years after they were punished, and I think overly punished in most cases. There were a few people who really deserved the sentences they got. Most people got sentences they truly didn't deserve, in my view. And that's a different perspective than what's been happening with crime on city streets, where nobody's punished for things that they're doing that are actual crimes, right? And that are dangerous to other people.
Yeah. No, I take the point. I mean, when you have a group of 1,500 people, some are going to be, there's going to be degrees of culpability. I agree with that. Part of, I guess what I'm saying is a blanket pardon, like, effaces all of those distinctions, right? So, like, the leader of the Oath Keepers is walking free as well as someone who was just kind of loitering around.
Right.
But, and also there was very real violence against police officers that day. So, I think there is a kind of selective attention, as there always is with crime, and like I said, I think the left is mostly the left is guilty of it and excusing it and all of that. The January 6th point is just to say that I don't see why a responsible Democratic Party couldn't sort of like just say like, take the win here, take the win behind President Trump,
right.
And sort of go from there.
Yeah, they won't do that. I think it's also interesting the implications for other cities. Of course, President Trump doesn't have the authority in other cities the way he does in Washington, D.C., but wouldn't I love to see the National Guard come into New York, especially if Mayor Mamdani wins and defangs the police? I'd feel better walking the streets myself if we had the National Guard here. So in certain cases of emergency where federal assets and resources are being threatened, the president can call in the National Guard. Maybe he'll choose to do that, and not just here in New York, and other major urban areas.
Mamdani is running on a platform of cutting back on police, both in terms of numbers, in terms of responsibilities.
Right.
You could very well see a situation, and I think that's a great point, Rebecca, where there's a conflict between New York and the federal government over this kind of policing. Right. Remember, it wasn't that long ago that Tom Cotton wrote that op-ed, and the New York Times kind of imploded over the idea of sending a National Guard in,
right.
And now it's I think the conversation on that hopefully has shifted a little bit.
And imagine even a Democratic mayor in a purple state who would have the courage to stand up now and say, yes, President Trump, come in with the National Guard and help me. We need your resources. No one will do it, but that would be a really clever political move for somebody who were brave enough to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, part of what Democrats have to figure out here is that if they're going to return to power, they need to demonstrate that they're capable of running things, and the situation of blue urban cities has really deteriorated and is not a great ad right now. I guess there's some shoots of hope. I mean, Daniel Lurie in San Francisco has kind of turned things around. Things had gotten so bad there, so maybe there's those kinds of pivots, although New York seems to be going the opposite direction.
It does, yeah. And sometimes it just has to get that bad before people rise up and say no more. I think back to that original point of the Clint Eastwood moment. For me, it's not just irresponsible and incompetent leadership that ruins a city. It's the population that tolerates it and doesn't think it deserves better, that doesn't fight back, that ruins a city.
Yeah, I think there's a scenario, and we'll talk about this more as time goes on, where if Mamdani is elected and, the city really deteriorates, that then becomes a real liability for Democrats nationwide ahead of 2028.
Absolutely.
There was a point made in a recent piece in Tablet by Armin Rosen, a friend of mine, where he said, the proposal to make buses free risks making them, rolling homeless shelters.
Yes,
I don't think people kind of think about that. I mean, I take the bus a lot, and sort of like how quickly things can deteriorate, how fragile New York safety is.
Right. We talked about this in last week's interview with Commissioner Tucker of the FDNY about the complexity of these systems that make our lives run the way they do in these cities. And if you don't have people who really can understand those complexities, have experience dealing with them, and know how to run things, everything can go bad really quickly. And I think we're looking at that possibility here in New York. And I think, do you have friends who are talking about leaving if Mamdani becomes the mayor?
No, they're not rich enough. No, I mean,
are they rich enough to live here?
Yeah, right. You hear a lot about this sort of thing. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. I think there's this question of kind of like, not about whether you fight for New York. It's not that. But I think there's some holding of breath. I do think he's going to win.
Yes,
I think
I do
people
too.
who are. I think there's a lot of kind of like not facing the music.
Yes.
People are kind of hoping that something happens or a white knight emerges, or
Right.
we're looking at the dinner and it doesn't look that good. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think it'll come into focus as the fall turns. But yeah, I'm deeply concerned by the transformation of the city into a sort of place that feels fundamentally opposed to the things I believe in.
Yeah.
That's a dispiriting way to live. Do you mean
course.
like you don't want to live in an environment that feels hostile to, the things you hold dear and to you?
Of course.
Right?
Yeah. I think that's maybe the message of what's happening in DC now. I mean, people don't want to live in places where crime is not crime, where, where your life is threatened every day and nobody seems to care. I mean, the only function of government, the primary function of government,
the foundational function,
right, without which there is no other function,
Yeah.
is to protect the lives of the people that it is there to serve.
The social contract, right?
There is nothing else that can be done if you're worried about getting carjacked or raped or murdered.
Yeah.
So if they can't do that, what are they there for at all? What is the point of having a government? Why can't we just all arm up, form militias, and defend ourselves?
Yeah.
So it's bad in every way. I just want to also add that Tom Homan came out and spoke about the end of DC as a sanctuary city because of the partnership between federal law enforcement and the Metropolitan Police Force. And that's an interesting, we'll see how that plays out. It's already playing out, but we're going to see what DC looks like after 30 days.
Yeah.
And I think we'll actually see something different after 30 days on a lot of fronts, and we'll feel something different. It's going to be really interesting to see if Trump gets an extension here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just speaking personally, as I mentioned, I lived in DC for 2 years, and there was a certain, I agree with you on this, Rebecca, that there was a certain assumption like, well, this is just the way it is, in the basically in the shadow of the White House, and the Supreme Court and the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial,
right.
that this is what it looks like, and it's also a city of real haves and haves nots. I mean, some parts of DC, you feel like you're kind of like, in almost, it's lovely, and other parts are really horrendous, and I lived, on sort of one of the border zones, honestly. And there were times, not to make myself a martyr, but there were times when it was harrowing. Yeah. Really harrowing. Disrepair.
Yeah.
It was a state of disrepair.
Well, you're one of the people, right, like we are here in New York, who just sort of thinks, well, that's the way it is. But why'd you tolerate it? And what could you have done about it, right? I mean, that's what I think a lot of people are asking.
Yeah. I mean, I think like it's like a lot of things. I was there. I was working at the State Department. I was fresh out of law school, and it was a great job, and I felt like kind of like sort of important, and I did what I had to do, and but the question of kind of like really addressing the neglect and the misgovernment and the sort of disorder, that you can live with. I mean, we do live with it.
I think a lot of people think it's the price you pay for living in an urban center, and I think there are a lot of 15 to 20-year-olds today who've never lived in a New York like I lived in my 20s, that was safe. Relatively, and that had sort of authorities that were respected, and there were certain guidelines about how to live together in a congested city. They've never had that experience. I wonder if they even know that they don't have to live this way. Right.
Okay. Good stuff. We're not going to, spend too much time on this because we don't know what'll happen yet. I almost am like imagining speaking to our future selves, but it's worth mentioning, and that's President Trump and President Putin meeting at Air Force Base in Anchorage on Friday. Zelensky and Trump and the Europeans huddled up yesterday. The word out of it seemed positive, seemed like everyone was on the same page. Credit where it's due. Trump brokered a peace agreement with Armenia and Azerbaijan this week, which is an important development in several ways. So, maybe he's on a little bit of a roll here, and we'll see. I think Trump's in a pretty good position here. I mean, if the contours of a deal emerge, great. If not, no one can say he didn't try. Kind of thing.
Yeah, and we do just have to wait and see. I mean, that Azerbaijan deal was also about energy and squeezing Russia. Yeah. And the Indian tariffs are about squeezing Russia. And so he's doing other things to try and set the table for a successful conclusion here. So, but we will see. It is Vladimir Putin and it is Zelensky, and we don't know what's going to happen yet.
Yeah. And, I think there are plans in the works for a three-way meeting. I think, people always get nervous.
Wouldn't you love to be in that room?
The room where it happens. People always get nervous when there's someone is left out, or they think people talk about Munich and the Sudetenland and Czech and all that. But I think it feels like maybe there's some momentum gathering for some kind of arrangement and agreement. I don't know. I don't know that they'll be. It will be just Trump and Putin in the room with the translators. I'm not sure yet whether there'll be a press conference or what the optics are going to look like.
It makes sense in that sense. This really is a negotiation between the United States and Russia. For whether you like that or not, Zelensky, as President Trump likes to say, doesn't really have a lot of cards to play here. He is dependent on the United States to negotiate on his country's behalf. So. I don't find that strange that he's not part of that conversation initially. Yeah,
and there'll be more meetings, after that. Stay tuned. Here, Alaska in the summer is lovely. Better than the winter.
Better than Russia in the winter. Right. Make it make sense. You wrote an article. Maybe you wrote more than one, but I caught the last one about what's happening with Letitia James and the investigations into her. She's being investigated both for mortgage fraud and for this thing that I want you to explain to the rest of us called the Deprivation of Rights. Tell us what that means and is it going to stick, and how you see this case in particular going.
Yeah, so just, the news lately on the James front, and you're absolutely right, Rebecca, is you kind of have to separate out two buckets. One is the mortgage fraud stuff, which we've spoken about on this program. That investigation is being led by Ed Martin, who's at the DOJ. This is investigations that are still in their inchoate stage. We don't know yet quite what form they're taking. We do know that grand juries have been convened and that subpoenas have been issued over two subjects. Two areas. One is James's fraud case against Trump, and the second is James's pursuit of the NRA, which basically forced it to fold in New York. Kind of aggressive civil prosecution. And the word is that the focus on the fraud case is the accusation that James violated Trump's civil rights. My sort of brainwave is that this was crafted to mirror Jack Smith's prosecution of Trump. It's the same accusation. Basically, this law is somewhat obscure. It was became law in 1870, and it was meant to kind of prosecute the Ku Klux Klan and other elements that were trying to prevent freed slaves from exercising their rights. So that's the historical context. What it's become used for is mostly federal cases against officers, state or federal, who were accused of violating people's civil rights. It's a little,
and that accusation doesn't have to anchor itself into an overt act, which I found
I'm
fascinating.
So flattered you really read, it. I'm flattered. Yeah. Exactly. And the truth is, what's interesting about Trump's DOJ here is that this has mostly been a tool of the left. When they think that state officials are not holding people accountable. And this, again, goes back to the Reconstruction era, where there was this idea that the former Confederacy were letting people off easily and couldn't be trusted to kind of enforce the law. So the federal government had to step in. And this can exist in both a civil or a criminal way, right? So you can sue someone for it and get money, or they can be charged with a crime. When Jack Smith charged Trump, it was about January 6th and preventing the right to vote. That was a very novel kind of application, and we'll never know. But part of me is interested how that actually would have held up in court. And that's about all we know here. I mean, we don't know what civil rights would Trump allege were violated. It's not so clear.
The right to conduct business freely, the right to, I guess.
Or that it was a kind of targeted prosecution, that somehow it was like discriminatory or targeted, I think, or vindictive. It would kind of take that form. But
it just struck me after reading your piece that this idea of deprivation of rights is such a bad idea, and it may have worked, in the post-slavery era, but we should get rid of this now because it is so possible to use this for personal political gain, for party political gain. It's so subjective what that means. I can't imagine.
And it's been mostly used against police officers, honestly. And prison officials. That's where we see most of these lawsuits.
Right.
And there's so many of them filed.
Would you like to see this law go away? Do you think it would be a net positive or negative if it was?
It's a good question. I think you want to curtail government abuse for sure. So it's partially limited because a lot of people, specifically police officers, have what's called qualified immunity, so they can't be sued. So I think we could get rid of the law. Another way would be to say, like, you have to clear a really high burden to prove it.
Right. Which we don't have now. Seems like the opposite.
In the worst situations, I think if there's real abuse, you want to hold people accountable. Or you can just say, maybe it should just be handled on the state level. You say maybe that the concern of the post-Civil War period has receded. We don't worry that, formerly slave states will disobey the law. And this should just be treated as a regular state criminal matter.
And what about the mortgage case against her? Do you think she's in trouble there?
Yeah, so, on those cases, and there's also an investigation against Schiff.
Yeah, we're going to do Schiff next.
Shifty Schiff. They're a little different, but they're basically the same cases. They kind of lied and misrepresented their primary residence, the size of the residence. Most colorfully, James listed her dad as her husband on one document.
Wow. Calling Dr. Freud.
Yeah, right. No, exactly. So, we'll see. I mean, I think they've both denied it or said, well, these were mistakes. The only thing I'd say is, and I've written about this, there was this prosecutor in Maryland, Marilyn Mosby, who was convicted of this. So there is precedent here.
And Donald Trump himself was accused of
and found
making
liable.
a mistake on the books, right, with his payment to Stormy Daniels. Is that where it was?
Stormy Daniels.
And he was, they had no tolerance for that mistake. But I think it was it Letitia James in that case? Who can remember?
Alvin Bragg.
But so the left has a lot of patience for mistakes on one side of the aisle and not on the other.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see here. Ultimately the decision is going to be Pam Bondi's whether to bring. I don't know whether these investigations are meant mostly as kind of like political matters, or they're really going to cross that legal Rubicon. You never want to bring a case you don't think you can win. That's a kind of old prosecutorial chestnut. So, that there'd be egg on their face if they fail to convict. One thing to watch is some Senate Republicans have now sponsored a bill called the Letitia Act to increase penalties for these kinds of mortgage frauds. So, you can imagine this like pincer movement where you have harsher penalties passed in Congress as these prosecutions are being
I hope someone's tracking all of the mortgage applications of all members of Congress right now, who are probably half of them are fast and furiously trying to go back and white out what they may have put onto their applications. Shifty Schiff, Senator Adam Schiff from California, in addition to his mortgage fraud case is being investigated by U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro for allegedly having leaked classified information to the media during the whole Russiagate hoax. We can now say with clarity. A whistleblower came forward and said that Adam Schiff was directly responsible for those leaks. What do you make of that case, and where do you think that's headed?
Yeah, hard to know. Russia, this Russia stuff is always a quagmire. You kind of have to think, okay, well, what's the crime? And leaking classified documents obviously is a crime. Sometimes it can be punished very severely. Sometimes not. Look at, it wasn't an intentional leak, but, some of the Signalgate stuff obviously was about confidential information coming to light. So, I don't know. One thing to remember is senators have some immunity for their legislative activities. So one question you'd have to ask was this in the scope of his duties or not? Meaning, was he acting as a senator in this capacity or not? And this came up with the January 6th investigation with Lindsey Graham, where and Mike Pence and others. So, sometimes these cases get kind of tricky, and elected officials have a lot of protection. They also have access to classified documents, right? So a lot of the issues sometimes with these is that people don't have access to them, and then they leak them. But I don't know. Jeanine Pirro is like a firecracker. Yes. For sure, and she's the nominee and the.
Also interesting to know, DC, right, that he leaked classified information that was false. The information was created in order to be false, in order to frame President Trump for collusion with Russia, and that is the information that was leaked. It's just another wrinkle to the story.
Yeah, it almost becomes kind of metaphysical. Like if you leak something that wasn't true in the first place, right?
But with the intent to fool the public into thinking it's true.
Right. Yeah.
I also wondered. I'm sure there are no actual legal implications for this, but I wish there were. Senator Schiff repeatedly said on television and in multiple interviews that over those years that he had personally seen evidence proving that there was collusion between Donald Trump and Russia, even as he knew that the idea that there was collusion was fake. Is there any ethical procedure that would apply to him there?
He's already been censured, right? So, I don't know. If, what I always say is, if you're going to convict, politicians for lying, the jails would be full. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. And
that's a hard thing for most people to hear. You understand it as non-lawyers, to hear that our politicians can lie with intent, can leak with intent, can manipulate, can deceive the public, and there really is no recourse to hold them to account.
Even
if they all do it. I
get that. I think the handling of classified information is, the questions you'd want to ask are, one, did the person have the right to access to this information in the first place? Who is it leaked to? I just as a little aside, I just went to see the new or sort of old Roman Polanski movie about the Dreyfus Affair, which is playing now at Film Forum. It's called An Officer and a Spy. It's lovely. It's terrifically done. And a lot of in that situation had to be like, well, how do you get these confidential documents to the press in order so Zola can write J'accuse and that whole situation and anyway, if anyone's in New York, it's worth checking out.
Okay.
A controversy 130 years old, but still feels relevant.
Sunlight.
I don't know if people, if this is an obscure story or not, but I know, this just came out a couple days ago, and that's the GQ magazine. I don't know if you saw this.
I didn't.
Hassan Piker is on the cover, and he's a podcaster and kind of personality.
I didn't even see the story, but it all makes sense already. What you're going to say.
He's posing in these super sexy photos, bare-chested, languishing on the bed, and the cover the title is America Might Be Cooked. Okay. And then, it's basically this laudatory account of this person who is a bigot and an anti-Semite. The author of the article waxes poetic about the sunlight on his chest and this sort of glory of all this. This is someone who has called Jews inbred, who has called them bloodthirsty pig dogs, who says it doesn't matter if rape happened on October 7th. And it's just a real sign of moral bankruptcy and just idiocy, actually, more than anything else. And it's indicative of a culture that has totally sort of lost its bearings. I'm not saying GQ was ever sort of like, the Bible, but it was, it was a smart and high quality magazine.
It's funny
with a famous Jewish editor-in-chief for a long time, Art Cooper.
Yeah.
And now it's just ridiculous.
It's funny that you're saying it because I actually, until you said it, had not thought about GQ. Not that I did much before, but I didn't know that was still a magazine and it was still out there. Yeah. And so I wonder, what do you think? Do you think that they did this because they're morally bankrupt and they believe that he might be a guy worth praising? Or do you think they did it to be provocative and get eyeballs on it?
Yeah, probably mostly the latter. I mean, I was just, I didn't do a scientific study, but, the impressions and likes on Twitter were through the roof. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's as these entities become more and more relevant, right, they pursue with more and more desperation this kind of provocation that really is pretty cheap. Yeah. But that's their lifeline. But that doesn't make it defensible. It's still bankrupt. It's still appalling. And you mentioned culture. We started talking about culture and the Kennedy Center, and I think the culture is worth fighting for, and this is the kind of thing that is just worth naming as the disgusting spotlighting of an anti-Semite that it is.
Okay, my Sunlight is about a subject that we talk about a lot, which is the sort of changing political winds in Europe, Western Europe in particular. But there's just been a surge in popularity amongst the populist parties across some very important countries in Europe, and it's an indicator of where Western Europe is. There's also been a surge in the pushback against these populist movements. But for the first time in the last few weeks, a lot of these movements, like the Reform UK in Britain, which is Nigel Farage's party, or the FPO in Austria, or AFD in Germany, which you've written about, and we can't wait to read that article, or the RN party in France. These parties are for the first time polling higher than their number two competitors, let's say, and that's a big moment. It's suggestive that the populations they've for a long time now had enough of illegal immigration and the economic situation in a lot of these countries, and some of it has to do with globalism and the EU and control. But I think it's safe to say that the economy and immigration, or illegal immigration, are the big issues. And there's tremendous pushback. And even in Romania, which we've talked about also on this show, where in 2024, if you remember, Calin Georgescu won. But the country basically just decided, the elites, that would not be acceptable. So they just annulled his win and claimed that there was Russian interference, and that's why they had to do it. And just now, our State Department in the United States issued a report acknowledging that there really wasn't Russian interference in any significant way. So just as the populist movements across Europe are rising up and really saying they've had enough, there is an equal surge in the pushback against them. I know who I hope will win. We've seen that here in the United States too. And we should all be aware and look out for censorship, because that's always tip of the spear for those who are trying to squelch these populist movements. We had our bout with it here in the United States the last 4 years. They're having it all across Western Europe. Britain has now become famous for it. And that's always the signal that the populists are winning and are being resisted.
No, that's a great point. And as Rebecca said, I sat down with one of the leaders of the AFD in Berlin the other week, and she hammered home, it was one, immigration, and two, the economy. And that's kind of the formula, I think, that's really pushing a lot of these surging parties. And I think you're absolutely right to say, there's now a constellation of these parties.
Yep.
And it's definitely something to watch. My sunburn is for the plaudits in the press that are being given to one Anas al-Sharif, who worked for Al Jazeera in Gaza, was killed in an Israeli airstrike earlier this week. The inconvenient truth is he was also a member of Hamas. And there are definitely conversations to be had about freedom of the press and about the danger that journalists are in. I'm here for those conversations, but the willful ignorance about the refusal to see the proof that was marshaled, name, rank, serial number, salary, position. This person was a commander of a rocket launching squad in Gaza. That's in addition to a post celebrating October 7th, to a picture giving all that can be described as a bear hug to Yahya Sinwar. This is not a hero. It's another example of the sort of international criticism of Israel beclowning itself, right, and sort of bartering its own credibility. Ian Williams, the head of the Foreign Press Association, says it's like someone being a Democrat or Republican. Like, no, Ian, it's not. It's like someone being an ISIS or Al Qaeda.
Yes.
That's not
that
a
Hamas is a political party too.
It's like, I like strawberry ice cream, you like vanilla.
Right.
Not quite.
Right.
Again, it's about facts, and it's about distortions, and this is yet another distortion that all seem to cut one way, and it's just another libel.
And it allows Hamas and other terrorist organizations around the world to put on a vest of a journalist, or to put on an ambulance.
We saw this.
Vest,
it was amazing. It was
the World
like
Kitchen,
World Central Kitchen, which has been so critical of Israel.
Right.
Meanwhile, this is like, it's like, the people are like, it's like backstage at a production of Macbeth. They're all putting on these uniforms. It's like a theater troupe.
It's outrageous, but it's. Why wouldn't they do that, given what you just said about the way the world reacts when Hamas terrorists cloak themselves in costumes and pretend to be something other than what they are? We're putting halos on the heads of terrorists.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good phrase. Rekha, thank you. We'll see you next week.
Can I sunburn?
Oh, of course. Please.
You can't let me go with all this pent-up anger.
You have your own. Please.
I have to attack Britain just one more time at the end of the show, because there was a story this week about an illegal migrant in Canary Wharf in London who entered someone's home, a woman's home, and a citizen arrest was made, and they brought this illegal migrant to the police, and the police said, we have to let him go because he didn't commit theft. So this idea of trespassing in Britain being a civil offense means that in Britain today, an illegal immigrant who broke into the country can break into someone's home, basically, but as long as they don't put their hands on you or steal anything, they get to go free. While British citizens, if they pray silently within a certain range of an abortion clinic, are hauled off to jail. That's the state of the UK today.
Yeah. Okay.
On that happy note,
we'll see you next week.